Hello everyone, I'm Arcanum, and today I'm here with a video explaining a small research project I conducted on the unknown in an effort to get more people to play him. First of all, hold up just a second there, little Jimmy. What am I even talking about, and where did this even originate from? Well, let's start at the beginning, with our origins. You see, we originate from Africa. Humans left Africa and spread throughout the continent many years ago, and eventually some made it to North America and settled the glorious land of Canada. Fast forward a few years with nothing of note happening in between, and we get to the release date for The Unknown, the 12th of March of the year 2024 CE. Unfortunately, even post-launch, there weren't that many people playing Unknown, and I felt disappointed that I was rarely going against them as a survivor. Oddly enough, I began to see The Unknown appear more in other games and media, and more so than any of my matches. It really makes you think what other characters from other media can often appear out of seemingly nowhere and in more popular manners. Anyways, I wanted to confirm that there is an endangered species of unknown players, or at least that many people weren't playing him as much. So, the other day when I was doing research on my favorite research website, wink wink, nightlight.gg, I saw that just this year alone, the Unknown's pick rate plummeted severely. Hell, even post-flick Nerf Oni was more popular than him based on Nightlight's stat this month alone. I figured, surely the reason people are playing him less is that he is considered a weak killer. Though that wasn't the case. Where was the Unknown? Content creators were placing him as an above-average killer most of the time, so his strength was definitely not a problem. I figured that if I really wanted to get to the bottom of this, I had to use a more methodical approach. And what is that more methodical approach? That is, of course, the scientific method. You see, the scientific method is a systematic approach to gathering knowledge that involves observation, question formation, hypothesis development, experimentation, data analysis, and conclusion. It is a core tool used in scientific inquiry to establish facts throughout testing and experimentation, ensuring that results are objective and can be replicated. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I had to be more methodical in my approach. At first, I thought I would simply ask what's stopping players from playing the unknown, and I got few and sometimes vague replies, while others were very specific. I figured it would be better to ask people who have played the unknown what it is that they do in their games in order to show those that don't play them as often what to improve on as a comparison and to hopefully motivate them. But wait, there's actually a lot more to it than that. First of all, what do I even ask unknown players? And by what means am I going to ask them these questions? Are my questions even going to be representative of the sample that I take? And how will I know if everybody understands the same jargon like skill? How the hell do I define, let alone measure, skill with questions? To answer all these questions, I used my nerd abilities. I also used some minor aspirations. I decided to create a survey with clearly defined variables. Scientific method. Or categories that were clarified and measured based on self-reports with a basic scale. Here are some example questions that hopefully clarify the jargon used and would hopefully and accurately reflect what I wanted to measure. So, my variables, or categories, I shall call them from now on, were meant to be simple to understand and also impactful towards the game results amongst the unknown players. These categories were killer experience, unknown playtime, UVX accuracy, pressure, UVX use, and hallucination/delulu management. There's a description next to each category, but I will also briefly explain what we measure next just in case there is some confusion. First, let's take a look at UVX accuracy. UVX accuracy asks players how often they hit their shots. We are not looking at anything else for this category. Above, we see our player aiming along the edge of a window's wall and messes up their aim, causing their UVX miss and not weaken the survivor. Below, we see a good example where our player aims and does hit their shot and the Jake falls and has to have hip replacement surgery in America of all places he could have gone down in. Good lord. Next, we will look at what UVX use means. And to explain this, we'll look at what UVX misuse or improper use looks like. On the left, we see an injured Sable that is in a very unsafe position, out in the open, with few means of safety, that will be represented by the stable and non-subject to change 401k investment fund piggy bank. The staple has a window of an LT wall behind these lockers that she can vault into. She also has a pallet farther to her left. In this scenario, it would be much better to just down her with an M1, since even if she does make it to safety, it is likely she will go down faster from an M1 than two M2s. On the right picture, we have a Megan who is very far from us and is far enough away to be in an unsafe area. However, the distance between her and us makes this use of power less useful, as she will even have more distance between us even if we do land the shot. It is also likely that she may have sprint burst ready and could make it to the car pallet to the left of her that always spawns behind the main building, or she may even make it to the inside of the main building altogether. Also, if your 401k was caught up in the market, then boo-hoo-hoo to you. You should have invested in more secure financial decisions like I did with Bitcoin and Compa Bitcoin. Yeah, invest today. Now that we have looked at UVX misuse, let's take a look at UVX proper use or correct use. UVX proper use is using your UVX successfully depending on the context. This can also be explained as just using your power in the right moments and not using it whenever your power is off cooldown. Similar to how an experienced blight first looks around their environment for good bump logic before they rush, an experienced unknown player must look at their surroundings and the situation the survivors are in before they use their UVX. This category is not only restricted to chases, but overall gameplay as well. For example, in the bottom two images, we see two scenarios in which our unknown knows they will get value, or it is very likely that they will get value from their UVX use. Exploding the UVX on the basement stairs is a practically guaranteed way to injure the Kate that is unhooking and apply weakened to the recently unhooked Jeff. Here, the two survivors don't really have anywhere else to go other than deeper into basement. Though that is not really a good play. If Jeff goes deeper into basement to dodge the UVX, his base kit BT will probably run out and will surely go down. If Kate goes deeper into basement, this makes the tunnel on Jeff all the more valuable and easier option as there's no one to take hits for him. Next, let's look at Dwight on Larry's, who was corralled into using his one and only exit, being the open doorway. Our unknown player had their UVX already pulled out and seeing Dwight panic, decided to get the easy down on him since he had nowhere else to go at this point. Finally, let's look at an important aspect to an experienced unknown, which is zoning. Starting from the top left and making our way towards the right, we see the unknown is carrying a survivor, a Tori, and notices a Renato hiding around the corner. Now, you can't see it, but directly to the left of the unknown there is a hook, and the unknown hooks the Tori there. Afterwards, he knows that this may be a really good time to use his UVX to weaken the Renato, either to spread pressure or to just commit to the chase on him as he is still healthy. But there is a problem. In the 2 seconds it took to hook and pull up his UVX, the unknown sees there are many places the Renato can go to dodge and unzone himself from this corner of the main building he is in. He can go to the left, where there are edge map tiles, towards the hook to dodge the UVX and leave this corner of the map altogether. If the Renato is in any way related to the plan orchestrated by Dio Brando to fulfill his glorious heaven plan, then Renato may use his stand, See Moon, to alter gravity around him and to rise in the air and utter the 14 phrases needed to evolve his stand into Made in Heaven. Fortunately for us, our unknown player, this was not the case, and instead he zoned the Renato towards the backside of the main by just holding his UVX and zoning him. The next picture shows how Renato is further zoned and corralled into a bottleneck where, once in it, would make it impossible to dodge the UVX. This is exactly what our unknown does, and after successfully corralling and zoning the Renato, and all it took was just a few seconds of holding and zoning, another example of proper UVX use with just a little bit of patience. Next, we'll be looking at pressure. And no, not that one song performed by that 90s singer and Egyptian actor Rami Malek in his popular band, Queen. Now, this one's a little bit more vague and takes a bit more experience to understand if you are newer to the game and macro gameplay. The pressure, or overall pressure, category was defined as the average amount of created and maintained pressure. I do understand that this may seem like a circular definition as using pressure to define pressure at a category is a bit finicky, but I wasn't really sure how else to define this for people in the survey. To demonstrate the pressure category, let's look at two examples of what we are looking for in the survey. An example of good overall pressure is seen in the left picture. Here we have multiple people weakened and injured. We have created and split our pressure so that we can pick off easy targets if given the chance to. On the right, we have a better scenario in which we have tremendous pressure. We have a survivor who is downed and slugged, presumably, with a 10-year-old threatening to pour salt on them. Two survivors are also injured and weakened, with one of them being in chase with us at the moment. We know that there is probably at least one person doing a gin right now, and one other person probably going for the rescue. Our last category that we will look at is hallucination or delulu management. A key part to the unknown's power is how you use your hallucinations and where you place them. An experienced unknown player understands the rules that determine hallucination placement and how to push it to its max potential. If you're not really familiar with the intricacies of the hallucination placement and wish to find out more, I made a video about them and you can find the link to the video in the description of this video. Now, let's take a look at good hallucination placement and management using Korean powers to keep your attention sharp. On Larry's, we see that we have hooked a survivor deep in the corner and have placed hallucinations near the top side of the map. You see, jingle jingle jingle, we have used strategic placement of our hallucinations with the considerations of the elevation and width rules involved with their placement. The hallucinations that will be represented by Peter Griffin, let's look at specifically the one on the far left, is 14 meters away from the hooked survivor, and it lets us partially shut down anyone going through the TV room or to quickly reach the unhooking survivor. We have a hallucination to the far right of us as well that we can teleport to contest the gen or the totem. However, there is also a hook directly next to our hallucination on the far left, and if we do hook a survivor there, we'll lose a hallucination. To account for this, we will use the elevation rule to our advantage and, jingle jingle jingle, place a hallucination around 3 meters above so that the one on the far left, even if it does get removed, we can still have one to surprise survivors. So in essence, we have maximized their 3 hallucinations in this scenario by using the width and elevation rules along with strategic placement. So by now, we have covered the more complex categories we were measuring for in our survey. Let's take a look at the results we found based on our sample of 28 players. As a quick side note, if you're interested in rereading the categories again, I'll place them here and you can pause the video to reread them now with the understanding of what they actually mean based on the examples shown before. Now, before we get into the results, let's give our brains a quick break with 2 random facts about tongues and with complimentary brain rot courtesy of TikTok. Let's look at the left image. You see, several years ago, it was a popular notion that tongue tastes were mapped onto certain areas of the tongue. The idea was that each area was only responsive to certain tastes. So in essence, we could only taste bitter things with the back of the tongue, salt things with the tip of our tongue, and so on. However, this was actually a myth. The German experimenter actually used a general sensitivity scale and not an absolute scale, and this scale got mistranslated into English and created the myth that was established later on. What the German experimenter actually found was that these areas of the tongue are better detectors and are more sensitive to these tastes. The back of the tongue is more sensitive to bitter tastes, but it is not the only place where bitterness can be tasted on the tongue. For our next fact, let's look at the concept of non-tasters, tasters, and super tasters. These are 3 categories that you can fall under based on specific gene expressions that lead to increased amounts of bitterness tasted. Non-tasters have the fewest papillae or bumps on their tongue that have taste buds in them with a TAS2R38 gene involved in perceiving bitterness. Tasters have a decent amount and are heterozygous for the gene, and super tasters have the most amount of papillae, or the bumps, and are usually homozygous dominant for the gene. Super tasters, such as myself, taste bitterness much more strongly than non-tasters and tasters. And it's probably why I am cursed to not enjoy chocolate as much. Truly a skill issue. Now that we are going to analyze the results, let's talk quickly about correlations, which is our first main method to interpret the results. Correlations are associations between 2 variables, or categories in this case. As one variable increases or decreases, the other variable may increase or decrease. Take, for example, this correlation between the amount of gasoline pumped in Brazil, that is represented in black, and the amount of Google searches for how to make bebe, represented in red. We see, as one increases, so does the other. Does this mean that pumping gas in Brazil causes Google searches for how to make baby increase, or vice versa? No. Correlations only show relationship between variables in terms of associations. They are not causal. Correlations are not causations. Increased sleep time the night before a test is correlated to better test scores, but that doesn't mean that sleeping more causes you to get a better test score. After all, if you never study for it, increasing your sleep probably won't mean that you get a good grade. With that in mind, let's get started. First, I decided to calculate the win rate of the players based on the reported stats on how often they win, that being a 3K, lose, a 0 or 1K, and tie being a 2K. Players would be grouped as either good or bad depending on their win rate. Good players would have above or equal to 60% win rate, and bad players would be below 60%. Next, I found the means for each category for their overall sample. That is, before I split the player bases into good and bad. Then I found the means of each category per player group. It is the means of the good players for each category, then the means of the bad players, and their each category mean. Now that each mean has been found, I correlated that to their win rates. I also looked at differences between the means of the players. Here we see that the biggest differences between the good and the bad players are in the UVX accuracy, pressure, and hallucination management categories. Now let's take a look at the actual correlations. Here we see that the overall correlations, that is the combined good and bad player stats, are in blue. Good players are in red, and bad players are in yellow. The strongest correlations are seen in the overall player base with a value of 0.5, which means it is a moderate strength of correlation. Since 0.5 is a positive value, then that means that it is also a positive correlation. So when UVX accuracy increases, we should see players have a higher win rate as well. This is also true for the pressure category. So in short, players who hit their shots more are correlated to higher win rates. Players who successfully create and maintain pressure are correlated to higher win rates as well. Here is all the data. You can pause it here if you really want to and observe everything that you need to know to satisfy your curiosity. I mean, like, who cares, dude? We found our correlations. Video's over. Nothing to see here. I am gonna go touch grass and get a six-pack. See ya. Unfortunately, that's not how statistical analysis works. There are still more steps we have to do to answer our question because, after all, not all data findings are significant. Not all number comparisons are the same. Our sample of 28 players is relatively small and can alter our results. And not every time we see something with a big number does it actually even matter. In order to see if our results, let alone any of our results, are significant, I had to resort to stumbling upon the deepest and darkest magic in all of Middle-earth, more evil and horrid than the One Ring, that which lives in the shadows of college statistic classes, and whose subjects tremble at the sound of its name, even in murder. I begins! SPSS! What is fun, fun, fun? Anyways, SPSS does the hard part of all the work needed in statistics and tells us which results are significant or not. Let's start with the general correlations, aka all 28 player category averages before they are split into the good or bad player groups. Now, there's a lot to look at here, so let's just simplify it by zooming in on this blue rectangle. What we are looking at here is the win rate or win percent sign correlated to each category's average or mean. Next, we need to look at the bottom, where it tells us that any value that has an asterisk next to it is significant. With this in mind, we only need to look at the row with the heart next to it, that is the one called the Pearson correlation. Now, working our way from left to the right, we'll make note of any time we encounter an asterisk. The first two asterisks we see are for UVX accuracy, and pressure category. Let's keep going further, and we see 3 asterisks, and they will be for wins, ties, and losses. Now, for the sake of these results, we don't really need to pay attention to them, as it should be pretty commonsensical that the amount of games you win, tie, or lose should be correlated to your win rate in some way or another. If you want to see the other correlations for the general sample and satisfy your curiosity, I mark them here. But remember, we are only focusing on win rate for the sake of this video. Now let's take a look at good player correlations. And we see that there are no asterisks along any of the categories we are looking for on win rate, so nothing is significant. The same is also seen for the bad player correlations. Nothing is significant in the categories that we're looking for. If you're more of a visual learner, I show here the means of the categories that we are correlating to win rate. The good player means are shown in the top left, the bad player means are shown in the bottom left, and the means are combined into one graph shown on the right so you can see how they compare to one another. Now that we know which correlations were actually significant, let's take a look at what it is that good players do better than bad players according to the data that we collected. If we know what good players do better than bad players in terms of their categories, we can know what to suggest to the bad players to improve on to hopefully win more. This time, we will only look at the results within this rectangle, and if we see the value of the test statistic as less than 0.05, then we know there is a significant difference in between the good players and bad players in that category. Here we see the comparisons between good and bad player means on their hallucination management. Since the value in the rectangle is not less than 0.05, then there is no significant difference between the groups. So we mark it with an X. We see the same thing for the killer experience as well. For pressure, we do see a significant difference between good and bad players. This shows that good players' averages pressure in their games is significantly better than bad players. We don't see any significance for unknown playtime though. Next, we do see that the difference between good and bad player average accuracy scores is significant, as one would probably hope to expect to see an improvement in accuracy in the good players. Lastly, there is no significant difference between good and bad players in terms of their UVX proper usage. Hopefully, you were able to stay sane and interested in these findings and didn't crash out and burn. If you did, you have my deepest apologies and wishes that in your next Survivor game, you loop a yellow apron Bubba for 5 gens, with the caveat that your teammates actually do gens for once. Arcanum, you, the viewer, say, with your emotional support IKEA plush animal sitting in your lap and your spoon in your left hand ready to remove the ketchup I just poured onto your Costco beef lasagna. What does this all actually mean? Nerd emoji, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Well, my dear viewer, let's use Killer Queen's Bites the Dust and go back in time to help us understand where we are now. You see, originally, I simply was asking players what it was that made it hard to learn or continue to play the unknown. I got some vague and some specific answers, but noticed that this would be an inefficient method to ask many people, let alone gather data to compare between the people I asked. To be more methodical, I designed a survey and used 6 categories that are defined and measured for the people taking the survey, also that I may have good data to compare them and contrast them to. The categories, although subjectively chosen, were likely to affect the gameplay of our unknown players and determine the good players from the bad players. Then we looked at what correlates to higher win rates, as well as what it looked like that good players do better than the bad players. My interpretation of the results suggests that players in general should focus on learning how to apply and create pressure and improve their UVX accuracy in their games, since those had the strongest correlations to win rate and were statistically significant. Here are the results visually explained for the correlations. The only 2 significant correlations were for pressure and accuracy. Additionally, those 2 categories had a moderate correlation to win rate with a strength of basically 0.5. This was only seen in the overall sample and not the divided player groups though. Hopefully I've made it clear that I want more people to play the unknown and try to at least motivate you, the viewer, to play him more. There's a lot to him that I love and appreciate in terms of skill stealing, macro gameplay, and more. Hell, I'm even a control player on PC, and I feel pretty confident saying that I'm pretty good at him. Stick drift not included in this non-biased opinion, of course. Unknown has many avenues to create pressure in his games that most killers wish they could have. From playing hide and seek with multiple survivors to weakening a survivor on a gen while chasing another survivor, he's just got a lot to him. He has a fun chase power. I mean, man's literally shoots balls that bounce. That, unfortunately, behavior didn't add jiggle physics to them, so we'll never know if they're voluptuous or not. But hey, they sure do explode, and he even has some cool skins, like the Big Bad Wolf one and the Detective Unknown skin. That's definitely going to come out any day now, because it was announced almost half a year ago now. He's also an above average killer. He's sadly not as strong as the chancla my mother beats me with though, but still, good enough. Lastly, he's also super satisfying to play once you actually get your shots. One reason I loved playing Unknown was the realization that there were insane orbital cross-map shots that you could only get and achieve with him, and if you don't get excited from that, then I'm not really sure what else will. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Yep, random noises to fill in the gap. Even more noises to fill in the gap. Huge thanks goes out to my research literacy professor who helped me analyze my data, and that even plays DBD with his son. He is very young, hip, and not old at all. Also to my friend Parker, who put up with my memes and helped me with this video. Credit of the Saruman SPSS joke goes to him. Also to Obsidian Leaguer and Fats, who helped me create and refine my survey to normal people. Twitch streamer vampire_toothy, who encouraged me to make this video. Many other Discord friends that motivated me and who I've used with my terrible dad jokes. Specific shout out to Heinz Ketchup 64-ounce bottles for being the best ketchup one could put on Kirkland beef lasagna. Bunny for suggesting what to do with my data analysis at times. And you, the viewer, for actually watching and sticking around to the end.